Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCBQ 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren. Why wouldn't I be? And we've got Mr. David North Martino here.
Hey, Alan, how you doing?
I am fancy, delicious, tasty.
That is absolutely the truth.
That's because you have to say that. But
that's right.
Yeah, no. Well, things are good. Things are good, and we're getting the podcasts up now. So because we've been running over 10 years, so everyone knows that over 10 years, 5 days a week, we have a lot of shows. It's well over 1,000 shows that we've organized, and there's going to be a separate or inside writing podcast under each category. So inside writing true crime is now up, and inside writing LGBTQ is now up. It's on all major platforms, as well as the website and and YouTube. So
that's
you
great.
can So for the fans of particular types of shows, this is why we've done it. So you can just go to that type. If you like history, you can go to the history inside writing, and you get all history shows. You don't have to listen to the others. So if you're in the mood for that, and of course, it's still going with House of Mystery, where we do everything, and that's still running as usual, and that app and all that stuff is around. So hopefully that makes it easier for people. That's what we're trying to do. So now today we've got another great show on what a great week. I tell you, it's always good around as it gets toward Christmas and all that. We get some really good writers. Now this book is called Called to Account, Sir Anthony Standen Adventures, and it's book number 4. So we've got a series here, and the author is David West. So thank you for coming on the show, David.
Thank you, Alan, for having me, and hello again, Dave.
Hello. Now, David, this is a 4-book series, and first of all, what kind of writer do you consider yourself? Like, what kind of genre do you put yourself in if someone asks?
Well, the books are historical fiction. The first book is also espionage, and since then the last 3 books have been crime novels, but they're all historical fiction. And
so when you take a character like this, you've got Sir Anthony, and when you're running this kind of a series, there's a certain amount that is truthful, historical, and real. And you add elements to create an interesting story, I guess, or to create elements that maybe have a different look on the story or add more to it or something. Is that kind of how you describe it?
Well, can I start with the first book, which is The Spy Who Sank the Armada? I discovered Sir Anthony Standen when I was reading a biography of Sir Francis Drake. And in that book, there's a passage that goes something like, there came a time when Sir Francis Walsingham needed more detailed information on the Spanish Armada than he was getting from gossip in Breton taverns relayed to him by the governor of Guernsey. And thanks above all to Sir Anthony Standen, he got everything he could possibly want. Now, Standen is my mother's maiden name, so I took an intense interest in him. And I started off by reading the entry on him in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. And it's kind of 2 pages of A4. And I just thought this is the most incredible story I'd ever read. But at key points in that story, I kept asking myself, well, why did he do that? And how did he do that? So my first novel, the Spy Who Sank the Armada, is essentially my fictional whys and hows woven into the known fabric of his life. So that's the first novel. When I came to start the audio books, the actor that narrated them, Simon Dedemi, he asked me for a cast list, and so I went through sort of everybody that has dialogue in The Spy Who Sank the Armada, and looking at it, basically 76% of the characters in The Spy Who Sank the Armada are real characters. So everything they do is real, and kind of all the fictional characters are people like innkeepers and so on. So the first book is as truthful as I can make it, with the answering the why did he do that and how did he do that. When I came to write the second book, I had gifted Sir Anthony a family by the end of the first book, because I thought I can hand this thing down through the family and keep writing historical fiction. And my way of working has been to go from where one book ends, page forwards through history a year at a time, looking for something that grabs me, and then building a story around that. Yeah, so that's how I work.
Well, it's really interesting, because I find this fascinating, because here you've got someone that's known and part of distant family members.
Yeah.
And you've got things that he's accomplished or done. And I guess what I'm fascinated about is, do you come up with an idea of where you want to take him? So like after the first book and the sinking, did you in book 2 start to kind of go, well, this is what I want him to do, or this is where I want him to see? Like, how does that develop?
Well, when I was paging forwards through history, I got to, I think it was 1605 and 1607, and the first thing that grabbed my attention was the execution of Giordano Bruno, a philosopher, for the heresy of believing that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the sun around the Earth. There were other reasons, political reasons attached to it as well, but that was what he was tried for. And a couple of a few years after that, I found that Pope Paul V hired an assassin to murder Paolo Sarpi, a Venetian cleric and scientist and philosopher. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that a pope had hired an assassin to murder this guy. And there was so much conflict there. There was the conflict between faith and reason, and the conflict between the Vatican and Venice. So I built on that conflict, and it became a 2-part novel, because I came up with the idea that there was somebody murdering priests by burning them in their churches, and Sir Anthony gets hired to try and track down who this murderer is. But then he finds that once they've solved that series of murders and have caught this guy, that the Pope then hires the assassin's assistant to go and kill Sarpi. So it was the guy who we thought was the monster turns out to have not been such a bad guy at all, and the Pope who hired Sir Anthony to track down the murderer turns out to be probably even worse.
I would think, but when you're covering these sort of topics, you would, how do I say, do you try to censor how you approach these types of events in your books? I mean, because in the last years, things have been so, I don't know, a little bit nutty offshore, with people talking, about politics and religion and things like that. It doesn't take much to get someone to go off these days, and get angry. So when you bring into something like this, where you have a pope hiring an assassin hitman, there's going to be people that are going to say, "Wow, that's not true," or "How could you," that sort of thing, right?
Well, that's a matter of fact.
That doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah, okay. No, I haven't really censored anything. I mean, I don't use swear words within the books. I try to, I mean, any sex scenes are no worse than a Bond novel or a Bond film. I don't really censor anything. I don't think I'm in the kind of danger of Salman Rushdie, but you never know.
No, probably not quite at that level, you might say, but it's just in typical, more, it's not even so much danger as in just a backlash online and stuff like that. People saying, oh, he just hates Catholics, or, people just, they're kind of nutty these days.
No, the only comment I've had on Twitter, I think, was, it was an online book club thing where, they were tweeting about Fire and Earth, the second book, which is the one about the Pope hiring an assassin, and I think one of the reviewers had said that it would make you think about your faith, and somebody said, I've got very set views about my faith, so I don't want to question them, so I'm not going to read the book. Well, fair enough, I'm not. Nobody's forced to read a book.
Of course. What's your research like when you do stuff like this? Because you're using so much of the history and timing and stuff. It must be quite a process. And how much time does it take you to do even just one of the books?
Oh, an immense amount of research. Yes. I'm quite fortunate because I don't know if you've heard of something called JSTOR. The J stands for journal. It was built in the United States, in fact, and it's an online platform where every academic journal is stored, every PhD thesis is stored, and so on, and it's accessed by all the universities. And through my old university's alumni website, I've got access to JSTOR, so I can start off doing research in the Encyclopedia Britannica or on Wikipedia. But then when I want to really dive deeply into the history, if I want to know something like how many physicians were there in Rome in 1610, then I can usually find out stuff like that in JSTOR.
Wow. So what's the time on one of these books? How long does it take you to accomplish each book?
Funny enough, I think I've worked it out that it's about 9 months per book from starting the book to publication. I'd written 2 books before I published either of them. So, in fact, today is the first anniversary of the first 2 books being published.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, when you've done a series like this, did you know you were going to do a series? Like when you started book 1 and you were doing the original, was it in your mind to follow up and do 2, 3, 4 more books?
Not initially, but without too much of a spoiler, in the first book, well, it's history anyway. So Sir Anthony Standen was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and it was thought that he would never be released. I've read sort of reports from Venetian ambassadors held by the British Library saying that Sir Anthony has been taken to the Tower of London and will never be seen again. He was, in fact, released. Anne of Denmark, King James's wife, pleaded for him to be released. And he was given license to travel in Europe. He had to leave England. He could go to Europe anywhere apart from Rome. And he went to Rome. So I thought, well, why would you go somewhere that you were forbidden to go unless that was just your nature? And so I decided maybe he had a love interest in Rome or in Italy. And that made me think, well, yeah, what about if he'd met this girl in Florence when he was there and fell desperately in love with her, but events just kept them apart, and then he was locked up, and how does he get back? I thought, well, maybe he can have a family. So and then having the family, I thought, well, I can just keep writing this series, until I run out of history or history runs out of me.
With each of these books, when you write them, do you hope that people get something out of them besides the actual history and maybe some of the entertainment value and stuff, is there sort of a subtext or some sort of a something that you want people to take away from each book?
Yes. The second book, Fire and Earth, that is really all about the conflict between faith and reason. I looked it up yesterday. Did you know that it was only 30 years ago, on the 1st of November, so it's just 30 years ago, that basically the Catholic Church accepted that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way round, and that they got it wrong with Galileo. That I found quite shocking.
Yeah.
So the second book is all about the conflict between faith and reason, and so many things came together to make that book. I mean, a very good friend of mine, his wife died really quite young, and he contacted me and said, is there, did we have an immortal soul? And I didn't really know how to answer him, but I said, well, René Descartes said, we do, and I've forgotten the name of the Oxford philosopher. Oh, Gilbert Ryle. He came up with the phrase "the ghost in the machine." In other words, it's a machine, and when the machine dies, the ghost in it dies as well. My friend decided that René Descartes must have been a very smart guy, so he believes there isn't an immortal soul. But that's what that book is about. The third book is called The Suggested Assassin. The Me Too thing was going on at the time that I was writing that, or was at its peak at the time I was writing that. I just thought, yeah, I can make this book all about misogyny and gender inequality. So that's the theme of that book. And the Call to Account, the one that is very recently published, I was doing my paging forward through history, and I got to 1612, where I found that the event that caught my attention was a pogrom in Frankfurt. So I thought, wow, yes, racism, sort of anti-Semitism. This is what the third book is. The fourth book is. No, that's what the fourth book is all about. So yeah, anti-Semitism takes the centre stage for representing racism and hate crime in general.
Well, I'm wondering, how do you organize all of this research, especially when you have to bring it through and have these threads throughout these many novels? Do you have a process? Do you have tools? How do you do that?
I use Scrivener.
Me too.
As my basic writing platform. So every PDF that I've downloaded from JSTOR, every website link, if I want to make notes, all of that goes into the research binder in Scrivener so that I can keep referring back to it. I'm actually changing that approach a little bit on the book that I'm currently writing, and I'm going back to an old-fashioned notebook because my main research tool in this one is a biography of Louis XIII of France, written by Elizabeth Marvick.
Now, where did your writing come from for you? Like, when did it start for you? How did you become a writer? What was it that happened that made you decide this is what I want to do? Okay,
well, a colleague of mine at work, I worked in engineering and project management and risk management, and a colleague of mine had been asked to do a talk to the Institute of Risk Management on procurement risk, and he said, would I like to help him and speak with him? So I said, yeah, okay. So we gave this presentation, and my colleague was then contacted by a chap called Jonathan Norman, who was the publishing editor of Gower Publishing, and asked him if he'd like to write a book on procurement risk. And he said that no, he wouldn't like to write a book on anything, but that I might. So Jonathan Norman came to meet with me, and I said, well, I probably could write a book on procurement risk, but I would be much more interested in writing a book on project sponsorship. That's essentially the management of a project from the client's point of view rather than the project team's point of view. And he said, okay, well, write me a an author's proposal and I'll put it to the board. And he did that. And I think the point that swung it was I discovered that there were 37,000 books on project management and one book on project sponsorship at that point. So I got to write the book on project sponsorship. And the thrill of this box of books arriving with my name on it was quite something. And I was already a bit of an open university junkie. That's the UK's distance learning university. I've done an MBA with them, and I've been an associate lecturer with them, and I'd done a degree in modern languages. So I decided to do the creative writing course, and I think the first assignment I wrote for my tutor, he sort of said, I think I got about 67% for it. And he said, well, it's good, but what's the point of this book? And I said, well, I don't know. And I was watching a quiz program called University Challenge that we have over here. And one of the questions was, who wrote the 7 basic plots or why we tell stories? And I thought, well, I don't know, but I need that book. So I read that book, bought it, read it. And the next assignment I wrote got something like 98%. And I entered it in a short story competition, and it was published in an anthology of short stories. And then shortly after that was when I was reading the biography of Sir Francis Drake and discovered Sir Anthony Standen and thought, yeah, I need to write this guy's story, because he was James Bond of his age. Why is he not more well known? And I started writing it. I made the mistake of starting from his childhood, and I just got hopelessly lost. And then when the COVID lockdown came along, I thought, what do? I've got unfinished business with Sir Anthony Standen. So I started writing the book, and I recognised my mistake. I thought you need to start in the middle of the action, not from childhood. So I started in the middle of the action, and then the book started to flow. So that's how it all started.
That's how it all began. What do you find the most challenging part of writing a book like this is?
Well, I don't know if it's no. The research isn't challenging. The research is the biggest grind. It's the hardest. It's the most intense phase. But once you start writing, I mean, I in Scrivener, I flesh out a chapter structure. So, I put about 15 chapters in outline and just try and think about what's going to happen in each chapter. I mean, I know what the beginning's probably going to be like, and I know what the end's probably going to be like, and then it's a question of how you get from the beginning to the end, going through all the various stages.
Well, I'm wondering too, how do you get into the mind of these historical people to make them into characters?
Just reading everything I possibly can about them. And I guess every person I've ever met in my life, maybe I steal a bit from many of them, but one of the hardest bits actually was in the second book, Fire and Earth. I have Sir Anthony teamed up with Earl Hugh O'Neill, who was a leader of the Irish uprising against Queen Elizabeth's reign. And Anthony went to fight with the Earl of Essex against Hugh O'Neill's army. So I had an Irish character, and I've read a lot about how to write in Irish, not in the Irish language, but how to write in a sort of an Irish way of speaking, and did a lot of research on that, and that's quite hard, forcing yourself to write in this slightly different way. And when I got to the end of Fire and Earth, I thought, right, I'm not having any more Irish characters in my books. Love them as I do. Trying to write in that style proved very difficult. And some of the reviews sort of said, it was difficult to follow this Irish sort of speaking to begin with, but people got used to it, I guess.
Now that you've done the work on this, how do you describe Sir Anthony? Like, how do you what kind of a character was he?
Well, he was full of inner conflicts. He was a Catholic at a time when he was spying on Catholics in a Protestant, and he was doing that for the Protestant Queen. He was a tall man by all accounts, and he what's the word I'm looking for? I think he liked the sound of his own voice. Did too much talking and not enough listening. He certainly, when he came back from Ireland, he went straight to King James because Elizabeth had died. James had become king, and Anthony's first job was in fact as Master of Horse to Lord Darnley. He went with Lord Darnley to Edinburgh when Darnley married Mary Queen of Scots. And when Darnley's uncle killed Mary Queen of Scots' secretary, David Rizzio, by Anthony's own account, he saved the life of Mary Queen of Scots. And because she was pregnant with James at the time, he was able to say that he'd saved James's life. And Sir Anthony was given the job of carrying the news of James's ascension to the throne across Europe. So he visited all the European kings and queens and princes and the Pope, delivering that news. And the reports that came back from the Europeans were that he enjoyed their hospitality rather too much and was rather boring and oafish. Maybe it runs in the family.
Well, speaking of that, I think you alluded to the fact that you're related to Sir Anthony. Am I correct about that? And how did you find out about that?
That's right, because Standen is my mother's maiden name. So from the very beginning, I wondered if maybe there was a connection. And I just went working my way back on Ancestry when I was between books, carefully checking, dates and siblings and all that sort of thing. And when I got back to Edmund Standen and found, rather than a portrait or a photograph, there was a coat of arms, and then it said that he lived in East Molesey, and I knew from the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography that Standen was from East Molesey. I knew I'd found the right guy. So basically, my 10th great grandfather is Anthony's younger brother, also an Edmund. So that was really exciting.
Must change your life somewhat when you find out something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of writing, it's you talk about characters, but they're not just characters. A number of them are my family. So, one of them's my family. There are actually a few. In the first book, my 10th great grandfather appears, Edmund, Anthony's younger brother, and I didn't know the name of Edmund's wife, but I had a meeting between Anthony and Edmund's wife, and her name. Well, I made her name up. I called her Anne. But then through the ancestry research, having actually found my 10th great grandfather, and I found that his wife's name was Dennis, which apparently was a very common woman's name back in those days. But I thought, I can't call her Dennis, so I decided to change her to Denise. So I had to change the manuscript to Denise.
Well, you never know, right?
Well, do you feel an extra responsibility in your portrayal of these semi-fictional real life characters, basically, because of that family connection?
Not really. I mean, I feel a connection to them. So I feel that there's some element of DNA that we share in common. So I try and think how I would react in the situations that they're in. But what I try to be as faithful to as I possibly can be is history. If a piece of history is inconvenient, then that's just too bad. I have to live with it and work my way around it.
Well, so let's get to the real dirt here. There's got to be some gossip or something you found out about your family here that that you were surprised about or you didn't realize? There always is with British royalty. I
mean, when Sir Anthony first becomes a spy and is first working for Francis Walsingham, he is sent to Flanders, where there's a major war going on between Protestants and Catholics in Flanders, and he is actually caught in flagrante delicto with Barbara von Blomberg, who was the mistress of Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, and was basically the mother of Don Juan, Duke of Austria. Now, the Duke of Austria, this Don Juan, became Duke of Austria. Was Duke of Austria, but became the governor of Flanders, whilst Anthony was having an affair with Barbara von Blomberg. So he became rather, when he came to visit his long lost mother, he discovered them in flagrante delicto and chased Anthony halfway across Europe as far as Constantinople.
Each book in itself does stand alone, right? You don't have to start at number one, or you probably should, to get the whole essence of the story. But each book does have its own story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've written them as if they're standalone books, and if there's any history that you need to know from an earlier book, then I just feed it in gently. So they can be read in any order.
And so how many more do you plan to do, or do you?
As I said earlier, my intention is to write until I'm either no longer able to write or I've run out of history. I don't think I'll possibly run out of history if I'm jumping forward about 2 or 3 years at a time at the moment.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of... Is there any other story that you'd want to write, or any other people that you want to write about in the same sort of genre, doing historical fiction in that sort of area?
No, I'm just really enjoying the journey of, finding all these interesting characters as I go along. I think I'll stick with the series I'm on, because, as I say, if the generations continue, they can keep passing on the skills they've learned of sort of lock picking and crypto analysis and languages and so on, and I can just go where I want to go.
Yeah, it's really it's a vast area to go into. Wow. So how does each book change you, do you think? So when you get through researching and putting together, writing, and it gets out there published, how do you think it changes you?
I hope I become a slightly better writer after each book. I get each book makes you think about things. I mean, Fire and Earth. I was brought up in the Christian faith, but it made me really think about faith and what it means. And I suppose the best way of describing my faith now would be, I guess, Taoism is about as close as I'd get to having a belief concept, or at least a rationale for what the universe is and where it's come from. But you learn something from every book, and I'm just learning about history. And I mean, I was educated through science and mathematics and engineering. Didn't really get too interested in history other than the Second World War because my father was in it. But I just find it fascinating now. Can't get enough of it.
Well, you mention in the description of the book, forensic science, I should say, is mentioned. And what was the forensic science like at that time in history?
I don't think there was really that much, but I was wondering whether I could get a microscope into the story. And in the research that I did, I found that there was an optician it was either Amsterdam or Antwerp, probably Amsterdam, who had invented an early type of microscope, but he kept it rather secret because on the his sideline was forgery. So he was using this microscope. His name was Janssen, and he was using this microscope to aid him in forgery. And as one of the characters in this fourth book is a doctor and comes from Amsterdam, I thought, well, it's entirely possible that he will have known and possibly been the physician of this forger optician fellow. I mean, if he was an optician, then he might know the doctor. So I thought, well, this guy can have taken the microscope, or the Janssen scope, as I call it in the book, and have used it in his study of botany and herbs and all sorts of stuff. So that's where the forensic science comes in. I try and get him to use this early microscope to find out what the type of flower is that's or what it is that's on a murdered victim's clothing, which is dough. Sorry, that's a spoiler, but it's dough, but a particular type of dough. So I have the doctor going through all his samples of specimens he's taken and looking at them under this early microscope and trying to find out what the strange substance is.
Do you find it difficult to create and write the relationships between these characters? Because in a way, some of them, and some of them you don't. Some of them are created, but just the individual things that each character has, and twerps that they have, the things that they like and don't like and feel and react and all that stuff. Do you find it difficult to kind of create that sort of atmosphere and make it real? Is that kind of the hardest part?
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, it takes a lot of writing and then rewriting and then rewriting again. And I'm enormously blessed to have my wife Claire helping me, because when I've written the first draft, she'll take it and then she'll go through it and she'll ask me questions about she wouldn't really say that, or would she, and wouldn't she? And I rely upon her encyclopedic knowledge of the Jane Austen novels and all the Georgette Heyer novels to help me with the romance parts. But and other things that she's done, she said, look at this bit here. You've spoken for half a paragraph about what Sir Anthony is wearing, but then his daughter Maria comes through the door and he says, "You look fabulous," but you haven't described what she's wearing. So describe what she's wearing. So yeah, Claire puts me on the straight and narrow a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would say so, in a sense, that because when you're writing with characters, and even the ones we do know, sort of, you kind of know them in a two-dimensional, you're not as three-dimensional as someone you've met. So it's kind of guesswork on some of the personality, even with newspapers and articles, you kind of have to go, well, and kind of try to put together how they would act or react and work with each other. I would think developing a relationship with characters would be the toughest in this particular genre.
Yeah, I think you're right. It just takes a lot of research into every character, and I go as far back, into their childhood as I possibly can, just to discover, what's made them how they are. I mean, I told you earlier on that I'm reading Elizabeth Marvick's biography of Louis XIII, and I'm finding out so much stuff only 12 pages in about a character that I've written about in the third book, and I haven't found anything that changes it yet. But Louis XIII was only 1 day old when his personal physician decided that he wasn't suckling properly from his wet nurse, and so he called in a surgeon to sever 3 membranes at the base of his tongue. And you think, what sort of, what on earth was the physician thinking? Although apparently that was quite a common practice at the time, but the effect it must have had on a 1 day old child having surgery like that, unnecessary surgery to his tongue, just beggars belief. And I'm finding out much more very, horrifying stuff as I go on. But it's really making me think about, you know, Louis the 13th, and of course he's the king who forms, you know, has Cardinal Richelieu as his advisor. So we're moving towards Three Musketeers territory now. So it's gonna get interesting.
Yeah, because that makes it real. You know, yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, are you the type of writer, can you hear the characters in your head? Do you have an inner monologue? I'm just wondering how you create dialogue, and if maybe you're pulling from actual dialogue that's been put into the historical record as well.
There's a small amount of historical dialogue, but you know, when I started writing historical fiction, I thought, you know, do I try and write in Shakespeare in English? And I think no, nobody would be able to read it. So I just try and imagine the sort of character that the person is and what their station in life is, and so how they might react and speak to the other character that they're with. So, you know, I think about politicians I might have worked with, or senior civil servants, or, you know, road sweepers or bricklayers or whatever, and think, well, how would these type of people have spoken to each other?
Who influences you as a writer?
Oh, the writers. Well, I would say Ian Fleming, because, you know, Sir Anthony Standen is the Bond of his day, and I read all the Bond books when I was young. Dennis Wheatley. Do you know Dennis Wheatley?
No, I don't think so.
He's most well known for a series of sort of occult books with a hero called the Duc de Richelieu. But he's written a couple of books which basically are my type of books, because they take fictional characters and place them in real events. One of which is the build up to the First World War, and the other one is the run up to the Spanish Civil War. And those books were in English schools back in the 1950s. They were sort of, in certain schools, had them as course books to read in order to understand how the First World War started, or to understand how the Spanish Civil War started. So I've used that style of, you know, basically trying to tell history with fictional characters. Then C.J. Sansom, I love his books. So if I could be considered as kind of a mashup of Ian Fleming, Dennis Wheatley, and C.J. Sansom, then that would be flattery indeed.
Well, there you have it. You can have it all.
Yeah.
So let's see. Now, do you have a website, and you do social media for readers and fans and people interested in your writing? And if so, where do they find you?
Yeah, my website is www.davidvswest.co.uk. So that's David VS, V for Victor, S for Spencer, West.co.uk. And the links to my Twitter and Facebook are at the bottom of that page. I could perhaps give you my Facebook address, but it's got a number, and I can't remember.
Well, it's easy. We can we'll have that posted up on us, so people can find it with one click and stuff like that. And so what's next?
Well, as I say, the third book, The Suggested Assassin, left us with some unfinished business in Paris with Prince Louis, who will become Louis the 13th. So I'm reading the biography of him, and I'm hoping that I'll find, you know, enough in there to make a book. If that doesn't happen, then I'll have to think about something else.
How was the pandemic for you and for your writing situation? Are you the type of writer that you kind of get shut down when things like pandemic, or when things are kind of wild or stressful around you, or can you just write no matter what?
No, I just had a great pandemic. I had the time of my life. I was able to totally occupy myself writing, and then when I needed some exercise, I'd go out for a walk, and you could cross the dual carriageway with barely having to look for any cars or lorries or trucks or anything, and yeah, I just loved the full shutdown. But I'm happy enough that it's over. I can play golf again, so that means I have less writing days because I play golf on Mondays and Thursdays.
And that's important.
Oh, yeah.
No, I always find it interesting to see, because some writers can just not focus and can't write when there's stress and intense things going on, and others are just not a problem.
Yeah. No, I mean, I had a couple of whiskies too many last night when I was listening to the possibility that Russia might have launched missiles at a NATO country and thinking, oh, right, okay, are we going to wake up in the morning?
Well, that's what whiskey's for, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
You know, Dave has that even if he doesn't hear it.
Right.
Yes.
Like they don't.
Yeah, I just pretend and have another whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly been a pleasure. It's certainly very interesting, a very interesting subject indeed, and we're glad you had time to come on the show. And of course, we were talking about Called to Account, which is the book 4.
Yeah.
In the Sir Anthony Stanton Adventures books, and the author is our guest, David West. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much indeed for having me, Alan and Dave.
Thanks, David.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Well, good night. This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.